He was just another starving orphan in a caravan of forgotten children, destined for a life of brutal labor. But when Tristan offered his last piece of bread to the alien chief who held his fate, everything changed. That single act of mercy would rewrite the future of two species and ignite a galactic alliance nobody saw coming. The caravan moved like a dying animal across the dust plains, a groaning procession of misery. Tristan was just another face in the dirt, another body bound for the camps. He kept his head down, stayed small. His future was already written in chains. Every day was a slow equation of hunger. You learned to ignore the ache, to make it one long hum in the background. A single piece of bread meant you lived another day. You didn't think about tomorrow. You thought about the weight of the crust in your palm. The alien guards watched from their elevated platforms, their sleek armor gleaming under the twin suns. They never spoke. Their weapons hummed with a low energy charge. Against their polished perfection, the human rags and dirty skin looked even more pathetic. It's a documented thing, you know. When people are pushed to the very edge, stripped of everything, something strange happens. Basic empathy doesn't always die. Sometimes it sharpens. It becomes a raw instinct. The other kids in the line were just hollows. Eyes empty. They'd stopped seeing each other a long time ago. Fear and hunger had worn their humanity down to a nub. Anthropology tells us that offering a gift is one of our oldest strategies. It's a way to connect, to build a bridge even from a place of complete weakness. It was the only tool he had left. His last piece of bread wasn't just food. It was the final thing he owned. It was the memory of a full stomach. It was a day of life. When the chief's hover platform descended, a wave of pure silence froze the caravan. The dust seemed to stop moving. The guards snapped to attention, and Tristan saw the giant alien figure step down, his eyes scanning the lines of human waste. So what desperate situation forced a 14-year-old boy to offer his last piece of bread to an alien chief? It was the most simple, terrifying fact of his existence. He had nothing else. No weapon, no hope, no future. It was the only move left to make. The only thing that was truly his to give. And that simple offering would land in the hands of power itself. Ronik Vorath stood there, an immovable weight of authority. He was a living monument to an entire civilization's supremacy. His arrival silenced the caravan completely. No one breathed. No one shifted. The air itself felt heavy, pressing down. His gaze locked on Tristan. It wasn't angry. It was analytical, cold, like a machine processing faulty data, a predator studying prey that had just broken the only rule of the hunt. His guards reacted instantly. Their armored gloves tightened on their rifles. The low hum of their energy weapons pitched higher, a clear warning sound. They expected an attack, a desperate lunge, anything but what was actually happening. Throughout history, across countless cultures, we've seen this pattern. When a subordinate offers something instead of fighting or cowering, it creates a pause. It disrupts the script of power. It forces the dominant party to recalibrate, and the offering was so pathetic. A single crumbling piece of bread in a dirty, outstretched hand. It looked absurd against the polished chrome of the chief's greaves, the intricate inlay of his chest plate. It was a pebble thrown at a fortress wall. Social theory tells us that when someone breaks the expected power dynamic this completely, the reaction is never neutral. It's either a swift, brutal punishment for the insolence or a shocking, unexpected reward. There is no middle ground. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10. It became a void, a tangible thing. In that void, Tristan's entire life was being weighed, measured, dismissed, or saved. The decision was happening behind those unblinking alien eyes. How did one simple act of kindness completely flip the dynamic between a starving orphan and his captor? It violated every rule. It was an offer of peace from a position of total defeat. It created a moment of pure, shocking cognitive dissonance for the chief. The script said the human should beg, or fight, or try to hide. He offered a gift instead, and then Ronik Vorath spoke, and his words were nothing anyone could have predicted. The alien chief's voice cut through the thick air, a low frequency that vibrated in the bones. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. What is your name, boy? The words hung there, simple and immense. This wasn't the demand of a jailer to a prisoner. It was the question of one person to another. It was the first time anyone with power had acknowledged Tristan had a name at all. The caravan system was built to erase that, to make them numbers, labor units, not people. Ronnick's tone held no contempt. It was pure analytical curiosity. It changed the energy of the entire dusty plaza. The shift was seismic. We see this across cultures. The act of naming is fundamental. It's a tool of personification. It grants an identity. It gives value. To ask for a name is to acknowledge a soul. Tristan's throat was dry. He managed one word. Tristan. It was a reclamation. A stark reclaiming of a self he'd almost forgotten. He said it to a being who could have ended him with a flick of a wrist. History is full of these strange moments. Clemency often hinges on this. The powerful must see a flicker of their own humanity in the powerless. They must recognize a shared fundamental thing beneath the differences. The bread was the trigger. The name was the confirmation. The chief's next words were the true call to adventure. They were an impossible door swinging open in a solid, unbreakable wall. The offer was a paradox. A gift from a captor. A reward for an act that should have been defiance. He didn't take the bread. He looked from the crust in the boy's hand to the boy's face. And he spoke. What shocking response did the alien chief give when the human boy offered his only food? He offered not punishment, not death, but the one thing Tristan believed was gone forever. I offer you freedom, Ronnick Vorath said, when you had no hope. But freedom is a terrifying concept when all you've known is chains. The word itself was a void, a vast empty space of unknown terrors. The known misery of the caravan suddenly felt safe, predictable. The offer hung in the air, more daunting than any weapon. It demanded a leap of faith into a darkness so complete it stole the breath from his lungs. The kindness was the real trap. The unknown was the real punishment. He was being offered a new life, and the weight of that choice was already crushing him. For a heartbeat, Tristan froze. His mind tried to process the words, the alien syllables that offered something his reality could not contain. Freedom. The offer itself felt like a trap. In his world, kindness was a currency that always came with a hidden, terrible price. It was the calm before a beating, the false promise before a betrayal. His instinct screamed at him to refuse, to step back into the line, to embrace the familiar grinding misery of the caravan. That was a known quantity. That was a pain he understood. He looked sideways, his eyes finding the other children, their hollow faces, their slumped shoulders. The silent girl who never spoke, the boy with the cough that wouldn't stop. Leaving them felt like a different kind of death. It was a betrayal, a weight of guilt that seemed heavier than any chain they could forge. Fear of the unknown is one of our most primal psychological barriers. We cling to familiar suffering because its shape is known. Its horrors are mapped. A chance for a better life, especially one that comes from a former captor, feels more dangerous than any clear and present danger. The alien world Ronnick Vorath represented was a complete void. What did they eat? How did they think? What invisible rules governed their society that would condemn him the moment he broke one? It was a vast, dark ocean, and he was being asked to swim. Studies of refugee resettlement patterns show this initial resistance is almost universal. Trauma breeds a deep, ingrained distrust of new systems, new promises. The brain, wired for survival, interprets radical change as a threat, even when that change is objectively positive. The comfort of the known hell is stronger than the terror of an unknown heaven. This moment, this hesitation, is the refusal of the call. It's the natural human reaction that kills 1,000 journeys before they ever begin. The story almost ended right there in the dust with a shake of his head. Why did this one gesture of mercy trigger a galaxy-spanning transformation that no one saw coming? Because Tristan's eventual acceptance, the slow nod he gave, was more than just a boy leaving a caravan. It was the first footstep on a bridge between two worlds. It was proof that trust, that most fragile of things, could be built from nothing more than a shared moment of bewildering humanity. It was a risk that defied every survival instinct he possessed. He looked at the bread still in his hand. He looked at the impassive face of the alien chief. He looked back at the line of children, their fate already sealed. He made a choice, and so he stepped forward, leaving one life to enter another. The dust of the caravan clung to his ragged shoes for only a moment, before the clean, polished deck of the hover platform met his feet, and the world he knew vanished behind him. The Vorath estate was the opposite of a prison, but it had its own kind of walls. Tristan walked through bioluminescent gardens and halls that curved like living things. The air smelled of flowers he didn't know. The light came from the walls themselves. It was a stunning contrast to the dust and filth of the caravan. but it was still a maze. Just a prettier one. Every glance from the Keldari household staff felt like a test. Their bows were too deep. Their silence was too careful. He was an outsider here, a specimen, a human child in a place that had never held one. The food on his plate was abundant, but its textures were strange. Some dishes pulsed with a faint light. The language they spoke around him was musical, a flow of soft vowels and sharp clicks he couldn't parse. The silence in those elegant rooms was thick with unspoken judgment. This is a classic symptom of cultural immersion shock. The mind enters a state of hyper-awareness. You become a social paranoid, analyzing every micro-expression, every shift in posture. You're constantly trying to decode a set of norms you weren't born with. It's exhausting. Your survival stops being about physical strength and starts being about social intelligence, a skill he'd never needed before. And then there was Merrick, the security chief. His gaze was a cold spot in the warmth of the estate. He watched Tristan like a hawk tracking movement in tall grass. His eyes narrowed whenever Tristan passed. His presence was a constant reminder. You are not safe here. You are tolerated, not welcome. You are a problem waiting to happen. Integration into any high-status group creates this exact tension. The existing members, the ones who've earned their place, see the newcomer as a threat, a disruption to the established order, a challenge to the hierarchy they've built their lives upon. Tristan's world had shrunk again. From the vast open horror of the caravan to the closed, beautiful trap of this house, his survival now hung on a new set of rules. He had to observe. He had to mimic. He had to learn which forks to use, which halls were forbidden, which tones of voice meant danger. It was a painful, careful process, a slow and fragile earning of trust, inch by terrifying inch. How did he go from a dirt-covered slave to a trusted member of this elite alien household? Not through force, not through fighting. He did it by becoming a scholar of their silence, a student of their subtlety. He learned to move through their world without making a sound, to understand the rules they never said out loud. It was a quieter, more delicate war, and his first true guide in this bewildering new world would come from the most unexpected source, the chief's own daughter. She would see the person behind the project, the boy behind the specimen. Laika Vorath approached him one afternoon in the Western Garden. She didn't look at him like a project or a prisoner. Her gaze held no suspicion, only a bright, genuine curiosity. It disarmed his fear instantly. Her offer was simple, reciprocal. "Perhaps you could teach me about humans," she said, her voice a quiet melody against the hum of the garden's flora. "And I could teach you about Selder." It was a statement that held immense weight. A dangerous proposition. This was a forbidden exchange. The traditionalist factions in the household, and across Keldari society, believed any human influence was a contaminant, a dilution of their pure culture. To them, Tristan was a virus. Laika's curiosity was a direct act of defiance against that rigid ideology. They began their lessons in the most secluded parts of the gardens, a world of soft blue grass and whispering crystal trees. It became their secret shared space. They traded language lessons first. She taught him the soft clicks and flowing vowels of her tongue. He taught her the sharp consonants and slang of his. Then it moved to history. She spoke of the Keldari's 10,000-year ascent. He told her fragmented stories of Earth, of wars and art and fleeting peace. They whispered questions to each other that they'd never dare ask anyone else. Cross-cultural mentorship is one of the most powerful tools for dismantling prejudice. It builds deep, empathetic understanding not through theory, but through shared personal connection. They were building a bridge, plank by careful plank, across a chasm of fear. Laika became more than a teacher. She was his political translator. She explained the delicate, invisible web of alliances within her father's house. She pointed out the servants who were loyal, the officials who were neutral, and the ones, like Security Chief Merrick, who were dangerous. She gave him a map to navigate a world designed to make him fail. She taught him which hallways to avoid, which greetings to use, which topics were landmines. Educational psychology shows this reciprocal method, teaching each other, does more than transfer facts. It builds mutual respect. It forges a bond of equals. It made him feel less like a specimen under glass and more like a partner in a quiet rebellion. She was his lifeline, his interpreter for a society that watched him with cold, judging eyes. She decoded the subtle shifts in posture that signaled disapproval, She explained the meaning behind a turned back or a deliberately delayed response. The cultural barriers he faced were not just walls of strange food and language. They were fortresses of tradition, deep suspicion, and a xenophobia so ingrained it was like the air they breathed. Laika became his guide through that treacherous landscape. What dangerous cultural barriers did Tristan have to navigate in his new alien family? They were immense and invisible. Walls of tradition, suspicion, and xenophobia. And Laika, with her patient voice and fearless curiosity, became his essential guide through them all. She gave him the tools to survive. But as their bond deepened, as the whispered conversations in the garden grew longer and more personal, their connection began to cross a line. It moved beyond mentorship. It became something warmer, something far more dangerous. A look held a second too long, a hand that almost brushed another. They were building a world for two, but outside their secluded garden the rules were very clear, and the penalties for breaking them were severe. Their friendship was a risk. What was growing between them now was a direct challenge to everything the traditionalists feared. It was a spark in a room full of fuel. The first touch was electric, a brush of her blue fingers against his human ones. It was a tiny thing, a casual accident, but it felt huge, a clear breach of 10,000 years of tradition. And they both knew it. Their friendship had deepened slowly, a natural progression from shared history lessons to something more, a connection now built on secrets and a deep mutual understanding. It felt warm. It felt safe. It felt inevitable. Laika was the one who put it into words, who made the danger real. They were in the gardens again. She looked at him, her expression serious. She cut through the warmth with a cold, hard fact. Intimacy between a human and a Kelder is not just scandalous. It's political dynamite, her warning was explicit. A map of the landmine they were about to step on. Their meetings changed after that. They became more secretive, the timing more precise, the locations more remote. Their conversation shifted away from the safe ground of culture and history. They began to chart the dangerous, uncertain terrain of their own feelings. Psychology shows us that forbidden relationships intensify this way. The shared risk itself becomes a binding agent. The act of defiance forges a powerful, intimate bond. Every stolen moment feels more precious because it's a secret victory. The kiss, when it finally happened, was not a gentle thing. It was a wordless pact, a silent declaration of war against the entire weight of Keldari tradition. It was a fusion. The cool, smooth texture of her blue skin against the warmth of his. It was a quiet rebellion in the dark. But there is a reason for these societal taboos. They exist to maintain boundaries, to keep the lines of power and purity clearly drawn. Violating them doesn't just bring personal shame. It can unleash a cascade of severe social and political consequences. It makes you a target. This wasn't just a teenage romance. It wasn't a simple story of first love. It was a political act that threatened everything. It was a direct challenge to the traditionalists' core belief in their own superiority. But worse, for Ronik Vorath, it was a disaster. His reformist project, his careful attempt to build a bridge to humanity, was incredibly fragile. It rested on a knife's edge of political tolerance. This was the perfect weapon for his enemies. A single piece of undeniable proof that his human experiment was corrupting their most sacred bloodlines. It was the evidence they'd been waiting for. Proof that human influence was a poison, an abomination that had reached right into the chief's own household. How did the forbidden romance between Tristan and Laika threaten everything they had worked to build? It gave their enemies that single, perfect weapon. It was no longer a political argument. It was a personal, emotional scandal they could exploit. They could point to the chief's own daughter, corrupted by the human boy, and say, "See, this is what his alliance brings. This is the end of our purity." It turned their private affection into public ammunition, and their enemies were watching. They had been waiting for a mistake, a slip, a moment of weakness, and now they had it. They were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Merrick's loyalty was a costume he wore every day, and the moment he saw his opening, he took it off. As head of security, his access was total. He knew every schedule, every route Ronik would take. He knew every blind spot in the household's defenses. He knew Tristan's habits, his fears, his growing bond with Laika. He had a map of every vulnerability in the house, and he knew exactly how to press them. He represented the silent, simmering traditionalist faction. They'd been waiting, watching Ronik's human experiment with cold hatred. They believed it was a sickness, a weakness, a stain on their pure culture. Merrick was their man on the inside. His job was to make sure it failed. He started with whispers, subtle poisonous comments in the right ears. He'd corner a junior guard. Strange, isn't it? How quickly the human learns our ways. Almost too quickly, like he was trained for it. He'd plant the seed of doubt and walk away. The role of a traitor isn't about grand speeches. It's about finding the existing cracks in a group's trust and gently, carefully making them wider. It's about amplifying the fears that are already there. Just beneath the surface, he turned Tristan's greatest strength, his ability to adapt, into his greatest weakness. He made it look like espionage. His plan was simple, elegant, and utterly brutal. He would stage an assassination. He would make it look like Tristan had tried to kill Ronick. And he, the loyal security chief, would arrive just a moment too late to stop the human spy, but just in time to put him down. In one move, he would eliminate the boy and completely destroy Ronick's credibility. The alliance would be dead. The reformists would be disgraced. The traditionalists would sweep back into power, hailed as saviors. History is full of these kinds of coups. They rarely start with an army. They start with a lie, a fabricated threat, an external enemy created to justify an internal purge. It's the oldest play in the book. The trap was set, not with weapons or force fields. It was built from lies. It was designed to shatter the fragile trust Ronick had built from the inside out. It was a perfect malicious frame-up. What deadly betrayal from within nearly destroyed the alliance Tristan had helped create? It was this: a calculated, cold-blooded plot by a man everyone trusted, a guardian using his position, using the very systems designed to protect the chief, to seize control. He used their fear of the unknown. He used their deep reverence for tradition. He weaponized their own values against them, all to erase every bit of progress that had been made. And when the attack came, it wasn't from a rival house or a shadowy assassin. It was from the hand Tristan was supposed to trust most, the man who was supposed to keep him safe. The attack was Merrick's own blade, and it was aimed straight at the heart of the future. The perimeter alarms shrieked, a high, piercing wail that cut through the Citadel's elegant calm. Emergency lights bathed the halls in urgent crimson. The traditionalist assault was a textbook siege method. They moved in a perfect encirclement pattern, relying on overwhelming force and the predictable nature of Keldari defense doctrine. They expected a stand-up fight, a heroic, honorable last stand, a battle of attrition that they were guaranteed to win. Krell, the stern Keldari weapons master, moved to the defense console. His voice was grim, certain. He advocated for a full frontal shield deployment, to meet their force head-on, to fight a battle of honor even in defeat. It was the only way his culture knew. Tristan watched the tactical display. He saw the patterns of the advancing forces. He saw the perfect, predictable lines of their encirclement. And he saw the flaw. His idea was insane by Keldari standards. It was a decontamination protocol, a system designed to flush entire sectors with a non-lethal paralytic agent in case of a biological breach. It was never ever used for combat. Innovation in war almost always comes from the outside, from minds not indoctrinated in the standard playbook. Outsiders see solutions that insiders blinded by doctrine cannot. His mind worked differently. It fused what he'd learned. Krell's disciplined training gave him an understanding of their technology. His human instincts gave him the will to break the rules. The plan was a true fusion. It was Keldari hardware deployed with human software. It prioritized civilian safety and non-lethal containment over martial honor. It was a direct violation of their warrior code. Asymmetric warfare is all about using an enemy's strength against them. Their predictability was their strength. It was also their biggest weakness. They expected a shield wall. They expected a direct energy weapon exchange. They did not expect the ventilation shafts in the outer sectors to suddenly vent a thick, pale green gas. The gas was designed to subdue, not kill. It was a security measure. Their combat armor was designed for deflecting plasma bolts, not for filtering airborne sedatives. It was a desperate, humane gamble, a decision that went against every hardwired instinct of the warrior culture around him. It was a third option, something that wasn't pure Keldari honor and wasn't pure human desperation. It was something new, something effective. How did his instincts and training combine to save lives? By creating that new path, by seeing the systems not for what they were designed to do, but for what they could do. The gas bloomed through the outer halls. The perfect encirclement faltered. The traditionalist advance slowed to a confused, stumbling crawl as the non-lethal agent took effect. It bought time. It created chaos in their ranks. It was an unorthodox victory. This act of courage, this willingness to break the rules for a greater good earned him a new grudging respect from some of the Keldari warriors. They had seen a new kind of strength, but it also painted the brightest possible target on his back. He had humiliated a proud enemy by refusing to fight them on their own terms. They would not forget that. Merrick made his move in the chaos, his betrayal as precise and cold as a surgeon's blade. The citadel was still reeling from the traditionalist assault. Systems scrambled, guards scattered. It was the perfect cover. While Ronick was isolated in the command center, coordinating what was left of the defense, Merrick found him. The chief was vulnerable, distracted. He set the stage for the perfect crime. The lie was simple and devastating in its clarity. The story would be this: Tristan, the human spy, had used the confusion of the attack to get close to the chief. He had attacked Ronick, and Merrick, the loyal security chief, had arrived just a moment too late to stop the assassination, but just in time to put the traitor down. It was a clean, brutal narrative. He would present Tristan's body as the final, irrefutable piece of evidence, the ultimate proof of human treachery. A corpse doesn't argue. A corpse can't defend itself. This is how effective frame-ups work. They don't invent new lies from whole cloth. They build on pre-existing biases. They feed the fears the audience already holds. The traditionalists were primed to believe a human would betray them. They wanted to believe it. It confirmed their entire worldview. The success of any conspiracy lives or dies on controlling the story the moment the event happens. The first story told is the one that sticks. It sets the truth in stone before anyone can question it. Merrick cornered Tristan in a secondary corridor away from the main comms. He didn't gloat. He just stated the new reality. His voice was flat. Final. The official record will show that you, the human spy, assassinated him. The words were the culmination of years of secret plotting. They were the payoff for all his patient waiting, all his subtle poison. In that single moment, Tristan's years of loyalty were erased. Every act of kindness, every effort to learn their ways, every moment of trust built with Ronick and Laika, all of it was replaced by a clean, simple fiction. A story designed to destroy him and everything he represented. What cunning plan did the traditionalist faction use to try to eliminate both Tristan and his protector? This a brilliantly malicious frame-up. It was the cruelest twist possible. It took Tristan's greatest achievement, his hard-won integration into Keldari society, his understanding of their customs and technology, and turned it into his most damning crime. His knowledge became evidence of espionage. His closeness to the chief became proof of a long con. It was a perfect perversion of the truth. But Merrick made one critical error in his cold, precise calculation. He saw the human boy he had first met in the caravan. He saw the project, the specimen. He saw a problem to be solved. He completely underestimated what he had helped to create. He didn't see the weapon. The boy was gone. In his place stood a young man forged in the fires of two cultures, trained by their best and pushed to the absolute brink. He had underestimated the fusion of human resilience and Keldari discipline. He had helped forge a new kind of fighter, and now he was about to face him. The fight wasn't about strength. It was about unpredictability. The one thing Merrick could never plan for. He fought with the clean, precise style of a master. Every move was textbook. Every block, every strike came from a formal Keldari combat manual. It was efficient. It was perfect. It was a style built for a fair fight on an open field. But this was not a fair fight, and the corridor was cluttered with debris. Tristan fought to survive. He blended the disciplined forms Krell had drilled into him for years with something else entirely. Raw human desperation. He wasn't trying to win with honor. He was trying to live. He used the environment. He kicked a shattered console panel into Merrick's path. He used moves that had no name, no place in any training. A hybrid style, mixing formal training with pure situational improvisation, often defeats a rigid, traditional form. It breaks the rhythm. It introduces chaos into order. Krell had always noted Tristan telegraphed his left hook, a predictable pattern a master could exploit. But here there were no tells. Only survival. The victory was messy. It was brutal. And it was undeniable. There was no clean final blow. It was a stumble, a desperate grapple, the hard edge of a broken data conduit used as a lever. A human had beaten the head of security at his own game. It was the classic story of the student surpassing the master. But it almost never happens by following the master's path. It requires bringing something new to the fight. Knowledge from outside the tradition, a different perspective. This was more than a physical confrontation. It was the triumph of adaptive fusion over rigid tradition. It was proof that something new, something stronger could be forged from two different worlds. How did this victory, this mastery of their combat, help him argue for survival before the Ancestral Council? It proved a critical point. It showed he wasn't some savage, some primitive creature who had stumbled into their world through luck or treachery. His ability to not just learn their ways but to master them, to even surpass one of their best in a moment of crisis, demonstrated a profound understanding. It showed he was a diplomat in the making, a negotiator, someone who had studied their culture so deeply he could challenge its champions on their own terms. He had earned the right to stand before them not as a beggar but as a peer. He had fought his way to the bargaining table, but exposing Merrick's betrayal, winning that brutal fight in the corridor, that was just the first battle. It proved his strength. It proved his will. It cleared his name of one lie. The real war for the soul of the Kildari people was not going to be won with blood on the floor. It would be won with words. It would be fought in the cold, silent chamber of the Ancestral Council, where tradition was law and change was heresy. They had stopped one assassin. Now he had to convince a whole civilization. The Ancestral Council chamber felt like a tomb carved from a single piece of obsidian. The air was cold, heavy with the weight of 10,000 years of unbroken tradition. The council members, ancient Kildari with faces like stone, looked down at Tristan. Their gazes were not curious. They were contemptuous. He was a stain on their perfect history, a problem to be erased. Warden Draven rose first. He was the embodiment of their scorn. His voice was a low rasp, each word dripping with the absolute certainty of his own superiority. This hearing was a formality, a prelude. The traditionalist had already written the ending. Tristan's execution, the complete and total end of Ronnick's alliance experiment. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Tristan stood before them, but he did not stand as they expected. He was not in rags. He wore the formal robes of a Kildari scholar, the fabric a deep, respectful blue. His posture was perfect. His hands were still. When he bowed, it was with a precision that spoke of years of study. When he opened his mouth to speak, the language that came out was flawless, musical Keldar. This was a deliberate act, a calculated performance. For a marginalized person to be heard by a dominant power, they must often first prove their competence within that power's own rigid framework. They must speak the language. They must wear the clothes. They must play by the rules to earn the right to change them. He did not beg for his life. That would have confirmed their view of him as a weak, pitiful creature. Instead, he argued for their survival. He took their own recorded history, their revered texts, and he turned them against the council. He quoted their prophets on adaptability. He cited their oldest laws on honor in the face of new threats. The most effective rhetorical strategy is often this: to reframe your opponent's deepest core values so they actually support your position. He was not asking them to abandon their traditions. He was asking them to live up to them. His entire speech was a weapon. He had built it carefully, word by word, fact by fact. It was designed to shatter their assumptions, to force them to see the contradiction between their proud history of overcoming adversity and their current fear of anything new. The silence in the chamber was different now. It was not the silence of contempt. It was the silence of people being forced to think. How did Tristan's mastery of alien etiquette help him argue for survival before the Ancestral Council? It gave him the one thing he desperately needed: credibility. It allowed him to stand before them not as a foreign beggar pleading for mercy, but as a knowledgeable, respectful advocate for a new future. He had earned the right to be heard by first proving he understood the price of their attention, and his closing argument, his final gamble to sway them, would not be a quote from their texts or a point of law. It would be simpler than that, more powerful. It would hinge on the oldest, most personal memory he possessed. A story that started with a hungry boy and a piece of bread. Tristan's voice echoed in the silent, cold chamber. He took them back, to the dusty plaza under the twin suns. To the moment that defined it all, he did not speak of the bread as a human offering, not as a desperate act. He reframed it. He called it a pledge, a bond of honor. He wove his own story into the fabric of their mythology. He took something alien and made it familiar. He made it Keldari. Storytelling is a fundamental tool of persuasion. It makes abstract arguments personal. It makes them emotional. It makes them stick in the mind long after facts and figures have faded. This wasn't a list of reasons. It was a story. His story. He painted the picture of a boy with nothing, a chief with everything, a choice that defied expectation. His final point was a masterstroke. He looked from one stone-faced elder to the next. He used their own history against them. Adaptation is our oldest tradition, he stated, his voice clear and firm in the vast space. Isolation has become our greatest danger. This is how you argue for change. You don't position it as a break from tradition. You frame it as a return to its core, its original, most vital principles. You tell them they have forgotten who they truly are. He wasn't asking them to become human. He wasn't demanding they abandon their culture. He was asking them to remember how to be Keldari, to remember the ingenuity, the boldness, the will to survive that had built their civilization in the first place. He was showing them that their fear of the new was a betrayal of their own proudest legacy. What desperate gambit did Tristan use to expose the conspiracy and save innocent civilians? He used the raw, unvarnished truth. But he didn't just state it. He weaponized it. He wrapped it in their own customs. He framed it with their own revered history. He forced them to see the corrupt rot festering within their own systems, using a mirror made from their own values. He made them confront the fact that their most dangerous enemies were not outside their gates. They were sitting in this very room, hiding behind tradition and lies. He made the truth impossible to ignore. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of uncomfortable revelation. The truth was a seed. It had been planted in the stony ground of their minds. It had taken root. It was a fragile thing, a small green shoot in a field of ice. But their enemies, the traditionalists who had built their power on those lies, would not let it grow. They would not accept this. They would try to burn the whole garden down before they would let this new idea live. The argument was won. The real fight was just beginning. Their response would not be a debate. It would be a final, ruthless solution. Draven's response to losing the argument wasn't concession. It was a final solution, a ruthless elimination. The traditionalists activated their last resort. It was a trap built into the citadel itself, designed to look like a catastrophic accident. It wasn't targeted. It was a wide net. Their goal wasn't just Tristan and Ronick. It was every official, every guard, every citizen who had shown support for the Alliance. They planned to wipe the entire reformist faction from the board in a single clean stroke. The plan was to trigger a reactor breach protocol. A failsafe meant to contain a core meltdown by vaporizing entire sectors. It was the ultimate scorched earth tactic. This is what totalitarian movements do. When they lose the ability to control the narrative through persuasion and law, they resort to mass violence. They would rather burn the entire system down than let it change without them. Tristan's knowledge became their only hope. His 7 years inside the Citadel weren't just about learning etiquette. He had explored. He knew the maintenance shafts they thought were secure. He knew the old service corridors behind the walls. He knew the emergency systems because he'd studied everything. Desperate to understand his new world, familiarity with the system's infrastructure is the classic advantage of the underdog. You don't need a bigger army if you know the secret paths your enemy forgot. The race was a silent, desperate sprint through the Citadel's veins. The countdown to the fabricated breach had already started. Alarms would scream. Seals would slam shut. Entire sections would be purged with incinerating energy. It was a massacre disguised as a tragic engineering failure. A perfect lie. They had to reach the primary engineering control hub, a room buried deep within the secure zones, a place they were never meant to access. What desperate gambit did Tristan use to expose the conspiracy and save innocent civilians? He turned their own technology against them. He didn't try to stop the reactor breach sequence. That would have taken authorization codes he didn't possess. Instead, he hacked the emergency systems on a deeper level. He overrode the lockdown protocols. He rerouted the safety valves. He used the Citadel's own immense safety features designed to protect life. to counter the murderous function Draven had triggered. He forced the system to prioritize saving lives over containing a fictional disaster. He used their own tools to save the very people they were trying to kill. The unmasking couldn't be a quiet revelation in a closed room. The scale of the betrayal demanded a public answer. The truth had to be shown to everyone. It had to be undeniable. It had to be a spectacle so devastating it would shatter the old guard's power completely. They needed proof and they needed a stage. Tristan didn't just stop the reactor breach. He hijacked the Citadel's entire communication grid for a live, system-wide broadcast. Every screen in every plaza, every public display, every personal comm unit flickered to life with his signal. He took control of the story. Below in the main concourse, Warden Draven stood before the gathering crowds. He wore a mask of grim sorrow. He began to speak of a tragic accident, a catastrophic failure, a loss they would all mourn. His voice was heavy with a false rehearsed grief. He was selling the lie, building the narrative of a heroic leadership overcoming a terrible disaster. Then Tristan played the recording. Draven's own voice, clear and cold, filled the air. The order to trigger the reactor breach. The command to murder thousands of his own people for political gain. It echoed through the plaza, cutting through his performance like a blade. The lie shattered on the spot. The crowd's reaction was a physical wave. Their initial confusion and fear curdled into a single unified emotion. Fury. They realized in that instant that their leaders, the people sworn to protect them, had been moments away from burning them alive. They saw the calculation, the cold ambition, the absolute betrayal of duty. The most effective way to dismantle a conspiracy isn't with a whispered rumor or a private meeting. It's with transparent, irrefutable evidence delivered directly to the public. It bypasses the gatekeepers. It reveals the truth in a way that cannot be spun or denied. It was a complete and total collapse of authority. The traditionalists' power wasn't built on loyalty. It was built on fear, tradition, and control of information. That foundation turned to dust in the space of 10 seconds. Political legitimacy is a fragile thing. It can vanish in an instant, the moment a leader is revealed to have fundamentally betrayed the most basic contract with their people, the duty to protect them. Draven hadn't just made a mistake.
He had planned their murder.
The public saw it with their own eyes. This gamble wasn't just about winning a political argument. It was about humiliation. It was about complete dismantling. It was about taking the opposition's central lie and exposing it so utterly, so publicly, that their power could never be reassembled. It was a strategic annihilation. How did that simple act of sharing bread become the foundation for an unprecedented interstellar alliance? Because it was the original living proof. It was the first signal that their two species could choose a different path. They could choose cooperation over exploitation. They could choose empathy over dominance. That single moment in the dust, a boy offering his last piece of food, contained the seed of this entire future. It was the proof that trust was possible. That truth was possible, and that truth had finally, decisively, won the day. With the old guard broken, their lies echoing in the silent plaza, the path was finally clear. The obstacles were gone. The deception was over. Now they could actually begin. They could build something new from the rubble of the old. The council chamber held its breath. This vote was no formality. It was a referendum, a choice between a frozen past and a terrifying open future. The air hummed with a nervous, hopeful energy. The old certainty was gone, shattered by the public unmasking. The stone-faced elders looked different now, uncertain. The final words of acceptance came from the most senior among them, her voice thin with age but clear. Perhaps, she said, the words echoing in the absolute quiet, some influences are worth embracing. It was a cultural earthquake, a crack in a 10,000-year foundation. On a data plaque that glowed with soft blue light, the formal alliance between Earth and the Kildari was signed. It was more than a document. It was a new gravity, something that would reshape trade routes, redirect the flow of technology, and rewrite the destiny of both species. This is how major political shifts often happen, not gradually, but in sudden decisive moments that follow the catastrophic failure of an old order. The traditionalists had overplayed their hand. Their brutal overreach created the vacuum, and this new hope rushed in to fill it. Tristan stood to the side, watching. He was no longer a refugee from a caravan. He wasn't a curious specimen or a political project. He was an architect, a builder of this new age. He had helped lay the cornerstone. The creation of a new political entity always requires a symbolic act, a formal public ritual that breaks with the past and makes the new norms real. This signing was that act. It was a line drawn in time. Before this. After this, the alliance was the theory, the political reality. But a theory needs a symbol to make it feel real, to make it personal, to make it something people can hold in their hands and understand in their hearts. What symbolic wedding gift brought the bread motif full circle in the most emotional way possible? It was a small handmade loaf, a quiet personal moment after the grand political theater, a recreation of the very bread he had offered all those years ago. The same rough shape, the same simple ingredients. But this time it wasn't an offering from a prisoner to a captor. It was a gift between equals, a pledge of a shared future given freely. It was the circle closed, but also a new path opened. That simple food had been transformed. It was no longer the bread of desperation. It was the bread of peace. And that symbol, that promise baked into a crust, would be cemented in the most personal way imaginable. It would move from the political stage to the most intimate of human and Keldari experiences. It would become the heart of a new beginning, not just for two civilizations, but for two people who had dared to cross the divide. The ceremony was a beautiful, imperfect fusion. Two worlds saying yes to each other. They stood together under an arch of woven earth ivy and Keldari crystal vines. Tristan wore Keldari formal robes. Laika wore a gown that blended human silk with the luminous threads of her own world. They exchanged their vows twice, first in the flowing musical tones of Keldar, then in the sharper, older consonants of English. The words wove their traditions into a single solid promise. The moment held the entire weight of their struggle. The fear of the traditionalists was gone, but a fragile, hard-won hope had taken its place. It was a quiet, powerful tension. This was more than a wedding. It was a statement, and then came the gift. After the formal words, after the ceremonial drinks from the shared chalice, Tristan presented a small, unadorned wooden box. Laika took it. The expectation in the room was for jewels, for some new piece of technology to symbolize their union. She opened the lid. Inside, on a simple cloth, was a small round loaf of bread. Its crust was golden brown. It smelled of earth, of warmth, of a memory. Rituals gain their true power from repetition and symbolism. The return of this simple object completed a narrative cycle that had started in the dust of a caravan. It closed the circle. Tristan had baked it himself. He had spent weeks finding the right grains in the Citadel's vast food synthesis archives. He had followed an old recipe his mother had taught him, a lifetime ago, before the caravans, before the hunger. His hands had kneaded the dough. He had waited for it to rise. It was a quiet, private act of remembrance and creation. The psychology of gift-giving is clear on this. A humble, handmade object born from personal effort and memory carries a weight no expensive jewel ever could. It speaks of the giver's time, their history, their heart. It is a piece of themselves. This small loaf was the final answer to Ronnick's offer all those years ago. That piece of bread had been an act of desperate mercy from a boy with nothing. This was the bread of freedom given back, shared willingly between equals, a pledge. What symbolic gift brought the bread motif full circle in the most emotional way possible? It was this. The same simple food utterly transformed. It was no longer a symbol of survival, but a sacred emblem of union and of peace. It was a promise baked into its very crust. The story of that peacemaker loaf would spread through two cultures, a legend born from a single act of kindness. But the most profound fusion, the one that would truly cement this new alliance for generations, was yet to come. It was a quiet miracle happening in a laboratory, a biological answer to a political promise. The bread was the symbol. The next step would be the living proof. The final quiet revelation came 6 months after the wedding. The scientists delivered their report on the most ambitious project of all. The genetic barriers between human and Keldari were profound, a biological wall that mirrored the cultural divide they had fought so hard to cross. The success of the procedure was a miracle of focused science and pure will. It was the ultimate testament to how much both species wanted this shared future. The process was not easy. It required adjustments at a fundamental level, a rewriting of basic cellular instructions that nature had never intended to mix. It was a deliberate act of creation, The birth of a child from two disparate groups is the ultimate symbol of successful integration. It makes an alliance personal for everyone. It is no longer a political concept discussed in halls of power. It becomes a living, breathing fact, a shared investment in tomorrow. This child would be the first of a new bicultural civilization. A living bridge, a perfect fusion of human resilience and Keldari grace. This tiny being was the physical embodiment of the bread shared years before in the dust. The small act of kindness had grown, transforming from a desperate offer into a new form of life. In science fiction, genetic compatibility often serves as a powerful metaphor. It represents the deeper, more profound possibility of social and cultural compatibility. If their biology can find common ground, so too can their societies. It is the final, most intimate frontier of understanding. The alliance was no longer just words on a data plaque or a strategic agreement between governments. It was a genetic fact, a biological truth written into the very cells of the next generation. It was a bond that could not be broken by politics or prejudice. How did that single act of human kindness literally reshape the genetic future of two entire species? It initiated an unstoppable chain of events. A starving boy's offer became a chief's curiosity. That curiosity became a bond of trust. That trust became a deep love between two people from different stars. That love refused to accept the biological impossibility of a shared future. It demanded one. And so science and will made a way. It led to the first hybrid child, a new being who belonged to both worlds completely, a person who would never have to choose a side. A living answer to the old questions of us and them. And as they looked to the future holding this tiny promise in their arms, the past was finally redeemed. The caravans, the fear, the battles, it all resolved into this quiet moment. This was the point of it all. The hunger had been terrible. The fight had been brutal, but it had led here to a new beginning, to a child who would inherit two histories and create a third, entirely new one. The story of their struggle was over. The story of their future was just beginning, and it had her father's eyes and her mother's smile. The long night had ended. A new day was here. Tristan and Laika stood together on the balcony, looking out at the sunset over Keldar Prime. The sky was a wash of deep violet and soft orange, the twin suns dipping below the crystalline skyline. The air was warm, quiet. For a moment, the worries of state, the endless diplomatic meetings and security briefings were set aside. They were just two people watching the day end. The peace was still new. It was fragile. Everyone knew it. Old enemies lingered in the shadows, their ideologies not erased, just defeated. The threat was still a low hum in the background of their lives. But the peace was real. It was a thing they had built with their own hands, and they could feel its solid weight. They stood there, hands intertwined, waiting. Not for a threat or an alarm. They were waiting for the future they had built, the one their child would inherit. The resolution of any great struggle is rarely depicted with grand ceremony in the end. It's the small, intimate moments that truly signify a return to normalcy, a quiet, shared hope. The phrase, "You can have my bread," was no longer just a line from an amazing story. It wasn't a legend anymore. It had become the operating principle of a galaxy. It was the foundation of treaties, the first lesson in new cultural exchange programs, the core of the alliance itself. Science fiction often returns to this idea that our simplest, most human values, generosity, trust, a simple act of empathy, are not weaknesses. They are our most powerful export. They are the tools that can reshape galactic politics, that can turn enemies into allies, that can build a new future from the ashes of an old war. Their story is living proof. It shows that the smallest act, a choice made from a place of nothing, can ripple outward in ways no one can predict. It can change a life. It can change a world. It can change the destiny of entire species. The story leaves you with a simple, resonant hook. The same bread that once fed a starving boy, that was given in a moment of pure desperation, can become the bread of a shared future. It's a motif that echoes, promising that this isn't the end of the adventure, but the beginning of countless more. And that willingness to share, that fundamental act of connection, is the most powerful weapon any species possesses. It's stronger than any fleet, more durable than any armor. It's the one thing that can truly build a lasting peace. It starts with a choice, a single gesture in the dust, and it ends here on a balcony under an alien sky with a quiet promise for tomorrow. The future is not a guarantee. It's a thing you make. You build it choice by choice, act by act, moment of trust by moment of trust. The most powerful force in the galaxy isn't a weapon or a shield. It's the choice to share your last piece of bread. Remember this story when you think a small kindness doesn't matter. You never know what future you're building with a single act. That is the quiet power of one human choice. It can echo across stars. It can build alliances from dust. It can turn a moment of despair into a dawn of hope. Your next gesture, however small, might just be the start of something vast.